Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is an anime about two brothers who practice an art known as alchemy, which follows a principle of equivalent exchange, where anything can be given for something in return. Individuals who practice alchemy in this universe are able to reshape materials or change materials into completely different properties. It all depends on the user. The plot kicks off when these brothers tragically lose their mother and attempt to practice the rule of equivalent exchange in an effort to bring her back from the dead. And that's as much as I'm willing to say without spoilers, so from here on out, if you haven't seen the series, go away and watch it and come back after. If you didn't know already, there are two versions of this show. This version is adapted straight from the manga source material, while the 2003 version is pretty much completely its own story. Guys, if you watch my review on the 03 series, you pretty much know how I feel about that version, and I loved it, to say the least. One thing I want to say early on was that watching this series didn't change any of my views from the original, but it actually strengthened a lot of thoughts I had about it, but I'll get to that later. First off, I want to get something out of the way. The first 10 episodes of this series was not good. What the two series have in common is the beginning events. The way the story starts in both versions are nearly identical. The problem with Brotherhood is it assumes that you've seen the 03 series, so it gives you a condensed, abridged, and ultimately a less impactful version of those said beginning events. Look guys, I get it. If you've already seen the 03 version, you're not gonna want to see that beginning part of the show exactly the same all over again. You'll feel like you're trudging through what you've already seen before to finally get to what's different. I can completely understand that if they went the full route again, it would feel like a drag to you, but I still can't quite forgive it, as this series is trying to be something to wipe the slate clean. It's trying to be its own series, which it definitely is, but I'll get to that in a minute. This version just wanted to get those beginning events over with so that it could get to the rest of the story, which we didn't get in the original series. And look, I know this is a little bit of a nitpick and surely a matter of taste, but I liked the aesthetic of the original series more than this one. I'm not completely sure if it is a product of its age or if it was deliberate, but the original has this grungy, more grainy look to it. It fit the series so well considering the story's dark themes. I'm not saying the animation was bad in Brotherhood, as some would like to say. As a matter of fact, it's beautiful. The way I feel about it is similar to how I feel about Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. Z has this old classic grungy look, and detail for those characters' auras was amazing. Goku's clothes would shimmer from his gold aura when he would transform into Super Saiyan, but in Super we get this much cleaner, plasticky look. I don't really know how to describe it, but that's similar to how I feel about this. But ultimately, in a weird way, I'm actually glad the two versions have these aesthetic differences. The 03 version has a much darker story that had a lot more grungy and dark themes. The series had this pristine atmosphere of horror, loss, and existentialism. Don't get me wrong, Brotherhood still explores those themes, but the 03 version doubled down on this and committed thoroughly. It might not have followed the source material, but it knew damn well what it wanted to be, and it knew it had a story and some messages to tell, and it was determined to show this beauty through its well thought through artistic expression. Although I did not like how it ended with the movie, ultimately I feel this version was a masterpiece that should be cherished and praised for years to come. As popular as this show is, I actually still feel it doesn't quite get the affection it deserves. My hopes for it is for it to become a timeless piece of art. Suffice to say, after those abridged first 10 episodes of Brotherhood, the series really does start to pick up. However, right around the midpoint of the series, the pace actually does come to a slow pace, which is actually completely fine for reasons I'll explain in a bit. Alright, so I wanted to get that last bit out of the way. Normally I share my criticisms for last, but I love this series so much that I wanted to get the few bad things out of the way so I can complete this video giving it nothing but praise. While the original was a deep, existential, emotional nightmare, this one focuses a lot more on mystery building and eerie foreshadowing. This is why I'm perfectly fine with the slow pace this version has for a decent chunk in the middle. This series is a slow burn crime mystery of sorts, and I love it. While still keeping intact its dark psychological themes, this one focuses more on the idea of mass conspiracy, only giving you pieces of information at a time, and as the characters dive deeper into the rabbit hole which is their government, its connection to the source of everything is a thrill ride that keeps you at the edge of your seat, making you helplessly needing to watch that next episode. Several characters that were not in the original make their appearances in this one, and they were fine welcome additions. At first I didn't really care for Ling, but the way the story develops I really started to like him. I'm not going to lie, it took me a little bit longer to like Scar in this version. version. I also liked his design more in the 03 version, but again, as the story developed, I ended up warming to this version of the character and ended up liking him just as much as before. The Father, or Dwarf in the Flask, was an absolute fantastic villain. The way the show tells you about him as he's introduced as a complete mystery develops him so perfectly to the point where he's developed right up until the end, where everything you've learned about him in a way serves as a culmination and definitely sets up his conclusion. But let me talk about Envy. I need to give that character some love. Envy definitely was a good side villain in the original, but in this one, he genuinely took the spotlight. I'm willing to say that Envy is one of the best villains to ever exist, period. I'll never forget the ending of his arc, the way we get to see his demise. In a weird way, it's actually kind of beautiful. It was a scene that genuinely somehow made me feel a little bit sad for him, but also made me love the heroes even more. It was actually this scene that made me think maybe the show's name isn't just referencing the Brotherhood of the Elrics, but the friendship and pacts they have made throughout the show. All of the hardships all of them had gone through, even through points where they were enemies. All of them put their differences aside and came together and began to develop love for each other as human beings. We see this battle of each of them fighting an internal battle of grief, hatred, and pride. And in the end, they overcome all this and come together to learn that in their own ways, those things don't get humans anywhere. Despite all that they've gone through, they overcome their battles and fight for righteousness and love right alongside each other. And in contrast, in Envy's final moments, we see that he had always hated this about humans because he couldn't ever obtain this beauty, or even envious of it. It was an impactful scene for me that I won't ever forget. I also loved Hohenheim's story much more in this version as well, his origin story as a slave, and this homunculus is this being who tricked him to gain freedom and managed to obtain a physical form in the likeness of him. And God, I loved that plot twist of Selim being the homunculus pride. I genuinely didn't see that coming. I loved the Venom dynamic Ling had with Greed. Greed actually had a really interesting character arc that actually manages for you to feel for him in the end. We get to see how Ling had affected him. To see him go also was a surprisingly sad death. This show just constantly throws you for twists and turns and leads you to believe you don't know what's going to happen, and trust me, you don't. The 03 series had this fantastic plot of, oh, would you give anything to see your lost loved ones again? You think you can play God? Try bringing back your loved ones only to be met by a chilling abomination mocking your grief, there to spit in your face forever to keep the wound open and haunt you for your mistake. It's a trope that has been told over the years, and it was innovated in a beautiful way for this series. And I can never forget Dante's proposition and its ending, the questioning of the law of equivalent exchange. The original series truly is a philosophical art piece that needs to be seen. Guys, I really want to talk about the ending. It was absolutely perfect. I love the sacrifice of Edward's gift of alchemy to give Alphonse his body back, which is still my favorite character, by the way. It felt like Edward had reached his enlightenment in his life and truly understood where to put his values, and arguably the meaning of love in life. The ending where they got their bodies back and we get this beautiful ending of the two exploring the world and Edward marries Winry and they start a family together. I really don't have words to express what this ending made me feel. First off, this was the ending these brothers deserved. It was a beautiful, happy ending that was genuinely earned. Every last bit of grace we get in that last episode was the result of the thick and thin of the journey and lessons they learned together. The way we see how each of them bettered themselves in the long run. I believe this version had the better ending. I said it in the other video, I really thought the movie did the 03 series a disservice. Sure, it was fulfilling to see the brothers ultimately back together again, but to leave all of their friends behind, especially Winry, like they didn't even give her a proper farewell. They were like her brothers, and now they were just ripped from her life, and the last shot we see of her is just sitting alone. Definitely did not sit well with me. In terms of the ending of the show before the movie, I didn't appreciate the pacing of the ending, and I know I covered it in the other video, but I feel the need to elaborate on that a little bit more. Pacing of that original series was perfect. Every character went through development, and each scene, even if it was exposition heavy, fit to serve the story's narrative and never felt like a drag. Ever. But then all of a sudden, whether it was deliberately rushed or not, the story's plot suddenly feels thrusted at the end, almost lightning speed. Ultimately though, I'm willing to say I did not like one series more than the other. Sure, I do like the ending more for Brotherhood. I thought Brotherhood had the best conclusion, but it also had a rocky start. I will give Brotherhood one more point than the 03 version for that executed ending though. This video is not just a review of Brotherhood, it's a love letter to both versions as a whole. Ignore all of those fans that tell you to ignore the original series because it doesn't follow the manga. Both series are masterpieces on their own, and I demand that both must be watched. I love this shit.